Wesley Sutton adjusted the worn strap of his daughter's backpack as they stepped onto the packed train. His muscles ached from the long shift at the construction site, but exhaustion had become a familiar weight on his shoulders. His little girl, Daisy, clung to his hand, her bright eyes scanning the crowded car. "Daddy, I'm tired," she mumbled, leaning against his side. Wesley sighed, glancing around for an open seat. Nothing. Every seat was taken, and the few passengers standing looked just as weary as he felt. He tightened his grip on Daisy's hand, shifting to shield her from the swaying movements of the train. That's when he noticed the woman standing a few feet away, her delicate fingers clutching the overhead rail, trying to steady herself as the train jolted forward. She looked out of place, her sleek black coat and expensive-looking heels contrasting sharply with the worn-out commuters around her. Her deep brown eyes flickered with discomfort as she struggled to keep her balance. Without hesitation, Wesley tapped Daisy's shoulder. "Sweetheart, let's give our seat to the lady." Daisy looked up at him with sleepy confusion but didn't argue. Wesley gently guided her toward the woman, catching her attention. "Ma'am, you can take my seat." The woman blinked, clearly surprised. "Oh, couldn't. You have your little girl with you." "It's fine," Wesley assured her. "She can sit on my lap." The woman hesitated, glancing between him and Daisy before offering a small, grateful smile. "That's very kind of you." Wesley gave a tired shrug, just being decent. As she sat, Daisy curled up on Wesley's lap, resting her head against his chest. He let out a quiet sigh of relief. It wasn't much, but at least she was more comfortable now. The woman studied them for a moment before speaking again. "You must be a great dad." Wesley chuckled lightly. "Try." The train rocked forward, and the woman shifted slightly in her seat. "I'm Alessia Monroe, by the way." "Wesley Sutton," he replied, "and this is Daisy." Alessia smiled at the little girl, who sleepily peeked up at her. "Nice to meet you, Daisy." Daisy mumbled something incoherent before nuzzling deeper into Wesley's chest. Alessia's smile softened. "Long day." "Always," Wesley admitted. "Work, school, pick-up dinner, repeat." Alessia tilted her head slightly. "What do you do?" "Construction," he said simply, "pays the bills." Something flickered in her gaze, curiosity, maybe, but she didn't pry. Instead, she nodded. "That's admirable." Wesley let out a short laugh. "Not sure about that, just doing what I have to." The train slowed at the next stop, and Alessia glanced toward the doors before looking back at him. "Where are you two headed?" "Home," Wesley said. "Small apartment a few blocks from here." Alessia hesitated, her fingers gripping the strap of her designer bag. "Would you let me buy you both dinner?" Wesley blinked, caught off guard. "What?" She gestured toward Daisy. "She looks exhausted, and you look like you could use a break. It's the least I can do for the seat." Wesley hesitated. He wasn't the type to accept handouts, but something about the way she said it, genuine, made it hard to refuse. Daisy stirred in his arms, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, I'm hungry," she murmured. Wesley sighed, glancing at Alessia. "All right, but only if I pay next time." Alessia's lips twitched into a small smile. "Deal." As the train pulled into the station, Alessia led the way, her steps confident despite the chaotic crowd. Wesley followed, still trying to process the strange turn his evening had taken. Little did he know, Alessia Monroe wasn't just a kind stranger. She was one of the wealthiest women in the city, an heiress, a self-made billionaire, and completely captivated by the man who had just given up his seat for her. The restaurant Alessia chose was nestled between towering buildings, its golden lights casting a soft glow onto the sidewalk. Wesley hesitated at the entrance, glancing at the name etched in elegant script on the glass door. It was the kind of place he'd only ever seen from the outside, where the clink of fine china and murmured conversations created an atmosphere so far removed from his usual routine that he almost turned around. But Daisy tugged at his hand, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the grand chandelier inside. "Daddy, it's so pretty." Alessia, already a step ahead, looked back at them. "Shall we?" Wesley exhaled, pushing aside his hesitation. He wasn't one to let pride get in the way of a warm meal for his daughter. "Yes, all right." Inside, the air smelled of butter and herbs, the kind of rich, decadent aroma that made his stomach tighten with hunger. A waiter in a crisp black vest greeted them, his gaze flickering briefly over Wesley's worn jacket before settling on Alessia with instant recognition. "Miss Monroe," the waiter said smoothly, "your usual table." Usual? Wesley kept his expression neutral as they were led toward a secluded corner where a perfectly set table awaited. Alessia slid into her seat effortlessly, while Wesley helped Daisy onto the plush chair beside him. The moment they were handed the menu, he knew he was in trouble. No prices, that was never a good sign. He scanned the options, his construction roughened hand stiff against the fine linen napkin. Alessia must have noticed his hesitation. "They make an excellent roast chicken," she offered. "Simple but delicious." Daisy's face brightened. "I love chicken." Wesley nodded, relieved. "That sounds good." The waiter took their orders with a polite nod and disappeared. Daisy swung her legs beneath the table, glancing curiously at the towering windows overlooking the city. Meanwhile, Wesley leaned back slightly, studying Alessia. "You come here often?" She took a sip of water before answering. "A few times a month, it's a nice escape." He arched a brow. "Escape from what?" Her lips curved slightly, but there was something unreadable in her expression. "From the expectations that come with my name." That caught his attention. He had assumed she was well off everything about her radiated wealth, but there was something about the way she said it that suggested her life wasn't as effortless as it seemed. Daisy, oblivious to the shift in conversation, rested her chin in her hands. "Are you a princess?" Alessia let out a soft laugh. "Not quite." Wesley chuckled. "She's just fancy, sweetheart." Alessia tilted her head. "Fancy, huh?" He gestured around them. "This place, your coat, the fact that the waiter knew your name. Yeah, say fancy." She didn't deny it. Instead, she studied him with quiet interest. "And what about you? What do you do when you're not giving up your seat for strangers?" "Work," he said simply. "And when I'm not working, I'm with Daisy." Alessia nodded as if she expected that answer. "No time for yourself." He shrugged. "Haven't thought about it much. She comes first." The waiter returned with their meals, placing a plate of perfectly roasted chicken in front of Daisy, who clapped her hands in delight. Wesley's dish was plated so elegantly that for a brief moment, he hesitated to touch it. But the first bite melted in his mouth, and he had to admit it was the best meal he'd had in a long time. Across the table, Alessia watched him, amusement flickering in her gaze. "Worth it." He swallowed. "Not bad." Her laugh was soft but genuine. "I'll take that as a yes." As the evening stretched on, Wesley found himself relaxing. Alessia was easy to talk to, and despite their obvious differences, the conversation flowed effortlessly. She listened when he spoke about work, about the struggles of balancing long hours with raising a daughter. And in return, she shared glimpses of her own world, one filled with boardrooms, high-profile meetings, and a pressure he couldn't quite fathom. By the time they left the restaurant, Daisy was half asleep against Wesley's shoulder. He turned to Alessia, unsure how to thank her for the unexpected kindness. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. She met his gaze, something warm and unreadable in her eyes. "I wanted to." He searched for the right words, but before he could find them, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver, dressed in a sharp uniform, stepped out and opened the door. Wesley blinked. "That's yours." Alessia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Daisy, in her sleepy state, barely registered it, but Wesley suddenly felt the weight of their differences settle between them. He had known she was well off, but this was something else entirely. She must have sensed his thoughts because she spoke softly. "Let me give you both a ride home." Wesley exhaled, glancing down at his daughter. The train ride back would be long, and she was already drifting off. "All right." As they slid into the back seat of the luxurious car, Wesley couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had changed something. He just wasn't sure what yet. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as the car carried them through the streets. Daisy's breathing had settled into a soft rhythm, her head resting against Wesley's chest. Alessia sat across from them, her gaze drifting over his face when she thought he wasn't looking. Wesley had spent his life keeping his world small, ensuring that Daisy had what she needed without overreaching. But Alessia Monroe was anything but small. She was a force polished, enigmatic, and completely out of his realm. When the car pulled up to his building, Wesley carefully shifted Daisy in his arms before glancing at Alessia. "Appreciate the ride and dinner." She tilted her head slightly. "Had a nice time." His fingers tightened around Daisy's backpack strap. "Not sure what a billionaire finds so interesting in a guy like me." A flicker of something offense maybe passed through her expression, but it was gone just as quickly. "You assume only spend time with people who fit into a certain box." He exhaled. "I assume people don't usually cross worlds like this." Alessia studied him for a moment before speaking. "Maybe don't care about worlds." Their eyes held for a beat too long, something unspoken stretching between them. Wesley was the first to break it, adjusting Daisy in his arms. "Should get her inside." Alessia nodded but didn't look away. "Good night, Wesley." He hesitated, then muttered a quiet, "Night, Alessia," before stepping out of the car. The sleek vehicle pulled away as he climbed the stairs to his apartment, the weight of the evening pressing against his ribs. The next morning, Wesley was back at work before the sun had fully risen. Sawdust clung to his jeans, the rhythmic pounding of hammers filling his ears. But no matter how hard he tried to focus, his mind kept drifting to the night before. A billionaire, he still couldn't wrap his head around it. During his lunch break, he sat on a stack of wooden planks, scrolling through his phone. Curiosity got the best of him, and before he knew it, he was typing her name into the search bar. Alessia Monroe. The results were endless. Articles detailing her rise in the business world, glossy photos of her at high-profile events, interviews where she spoke about markets and investments like they were second nature. This wasn't just wealth, this was power. A shadow fell over him. "What's got you looking so serious?" Wesley glanced up to see his coworker, Mike, peering over his shoulder. "Nothing," Wesley muttered, locking his screen. Mike raised an eyebrow. "That didn't look like nothing." Wesley shook his head. "Just someone I met." Mike took a bite of his sandwich. "Judging by your face, I'd say she's trouble." Wesley exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know what she is." That evening, after picking up Daisy from school and making dinner, Wesley was wiping down the kitchen counter when a knock sounded at the door. Frowning, he dried his hands and opened it only to find Alessia standing there, a small box in her hands. His brows pulled together. "How did you?" She lifted a shoulder. "I asked." He glanced past her, half expecting to see a car waiting at the curb, but the street was empty. Daisy peeked around his leg. "Miss Alessia." Alessia crouched slightly, offering the box to Daisy. "I brought you something." Daisy's eyes widened as she accepted it, carefully lifting the lid to reveal a beautifully illustrated book. Wesley exhaled, shaking his head. "You didn't have to do that." Alessia straightened. "I wanted to." Daisy, oblivious to the tension between the adults, grinned up at her. "Thank you." Wesley stepped aside, gesturing for Alessia to come in. She moved past him, glancing around the modest apartment. Compared to the world she lived in, it was nothing a small kitchen, a couch that had seen better days, and a few framed pictures lining the walls. Yet she didn't seem uncomfortable. If anything, she looked curious. Wesley crossed his arms. "Why are you really here?" Alessia met his gaze. "Because I wanted to see you again." His jaw tightened. "Alessia." "I know what you're thinking," she interrupted. "That I don't belong here, that this doesn't make sense, but I don't care." He let out a breath. "You should." She took a step closer. "Why? Because of money? Because of expectations?" He kept his voice low, mindful of Daisy flipping through the book on the couch. "Because our lives don't fit together." Alessia's expression softened, and yet here we are. Wesley ran a hand through his hair, frustration and something dangerous twisting inside him. "This isn't a game." She tilted her head. "Do I look like I'm playing?" Silence hung between them. Then, before he could second-guess it, Wesley reached out, his fingers brushing against her wrist. The contact was brief, but it sent something sharp through his chest. Alessia didn't pull away. Instead, she whispered, "Give me a chance." And just like that, Wesley Sutton, a man who had spent his life avoiding risks, realized he was already falling. Wesley couldn't remember the last time he felt this off balance. Alessia stood in his small apartment, her presence shifting the very air around him. She wasn't supposed to fit here, not in the space he had carved out of necessity and survival. And yet, she did as if she had always belonged. Daisy had fallen asleep on the couch, the book Alessia had given her resting on her chest. The sight of his daughter so at ease with this woman should have unnerved him, but instead, it made something deep inside him tighten. Alessia's gaze moved from Daisy back to him. "You're afraid of this." Wesley exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I have to be careful." She stepped closer, her voice quiet but steady. "Because of her." He nodded. "She's my whole world. Can't afford distractions that don't last." Alessia studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, after a beat, she reached out, her fingers brushing his forearm. "What if I don't plan on being temporary?" His breath caught. She wasn't playing games, wasn't offering something fleeting. This was a woman who knew what she wanted, and somehow, impossibly, what she wanted was him. But logic still clawed at his ribs. You don't know what it's like worrying if you can cover rent, making sure there's enough food, working until your body gives out because there's no other choice. "I don't," she admitted, "but I know loneliness. I know pressure. I know what it's like to have everything and yet feel like you have nothing." Wesley's pulse thundered in his ears. He had spent so long assuming they were too different, but maybe, just maybe, their scars weren't as far apart as they seemed. Alessia's fingers curled around his wrist. "Let me in." The words were simple, but they shattered something inside him. He had spent years building walls, protecting himself and Daisy from disappointment. But Alessia wasn't asking him to give up control. She was asking him to trust. And against every instinct, he found himself nodding. Days turned into weeks, and somehow, Alessia became a part of their routine. She showed up after Wesley's shifts, bringing meals that made his kitchen smell like something out of a dream. She helped Daisy with her schoolwork, her patience endless even when the little girl grew restless. Wesley tried to fight it, tried to remind himself that worlds like theirs didn't mix. But every time he looked at her, really looked at her, he saw someone who had stopped caring about what made sense. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to do the same. One evening, after Daisy had gone to bed, they sat on the small balcony outside his apartment. The city stretched before them, lights flickering like distant stars. Alessia leaned against the railing, the wind catching strands of her hair. "I have to leave for Europe next week. Business." Wesley stiffened. He had known this moment would come, that her world would pull her away. But that didn't make it easier. How long? A month. His hands tightened into fists. That's a long time. She turned to face him fully. Come with me. Wesley blinked. What? You and Daisy, she said, her voice thick with something he couldn't quite name. Come with me. Have more than enough space. You can work remotely or just take a break. He let out a short, breathless laugh. Alessia, I can't just drop everything and fly across the world. She stepped closer, her fingers trailing down his arm. Why not? Because that's not my life. Her gaze held his, unwavering. Maybe it could be. Wesley swallowed hard. The thought of stepping into her world, of leaving behind everything he had built, terrified him. But the thought of letting her go, that was worse. Before he could overthink it, he cupped her face, his thumb brushing over her cheek. You're making this impossible. She smiled, leaning into his touch. Good. And then he kissed her slow, deep, a promise woven into every movement. He still didn't know how this would work, how two people from opposite sides of the world could find a way to meet in the middle. But for the first time in a long time, he was willing to try. Wesley sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the open suitcase beside him. The decision had been made in a moment of raw emotion, a kiss that had unraveled every carefully constructed wall he had built. But now, with the reality of it staring him in the face, doubt crept in. Daisy sat on the floor, carefully placing her stuffed animals into her own tiny suitcase. Do you think they have pancakes in Paris? Wesley ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. I'm sure they do. Alessia had made all the arrangements, handling passports, flights, and accommodations with the effortless ease of someone who lived in a world where things simply happened with a phone call. It should have intimidated him. Maybe it did. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He opened it to find Alessia standing there, dressed in a casual sweater and jeans, but still looking like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. She stepped inside, her eyes flicking to the half-packed suitcase. You're hesitating. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. This is a big leap. She nodded, watching him carefully. I know, that's why I'm here. Daisy ran up to her, grinning. I packed Mr. Buttons. He's never been on a plane before. Alessia crouched down, matching her excitement. Then this will be a grand adventure for him. Wesley observed the way she interacted with his daughter, the warmth in her voice, the sincerity in her eyes. It wasn't just a passing interest. She cared. Alessia stood, facing him again. Tell me what's holding you back. He exhaled. Everything I know is here. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm not asking you to give up your life. I'm asking you to live it differently just for a little while. Wesley let out a slow breath. He had spent years making safe choices, always prioritizing stability. But for once, maybe it was time to take a risk. He glanced at Daisy, who was practically bouncing with excitement. Then, he met Alessia's gaze and nodded. All right, we're in. The private jet was unlike anything Wesley had ever experienced. Daisy pressed her face against the window, squealing as they took off. Alessia sat across from him, a soft smile playing on her lips. First time on a plane, she asked. Wesley glanced around at the plush leather seats and polished wood accents. Definitely the first time on anything like this. She laughed. It's just a plane. He shook his head. No, it's not. I don't think you realize how different your world is from mine. Her expression turned serious. I do, and I know this is overwhelming, but I wouldn't have asked if I didn't think you could handle it. Wesley studied her. She believed in him in a way few people ever had. It was unnerving, but it also sparked something inside him. The flight was smooth, and before he knew it, they were stepping into a car that whisked them through the streets of Paris. The city stretched out before them, golden lights flickering against the evening sky. Daisy gasped as they pulled up to a sprawling townhouse with towering windows and wrought iron balconies. "This is where we're staying." Alessia nodded. "Welcome to Paris." Inside, the space was warm and inviting, despite its obvious grandeur. Daisy immediately ran to explore, her laughter echoing through the high ceilings. Wesley turned to Alessia, shaking his head. "This is unreal." She stepped closer, searching his face. "Are you regretting coming?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, just trying to wrap my head around it." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then stop thinking so much." He let out a quiet laugh. "That's not how I'm wired." She squeezed his hand. "Then, I guess I'll just have to keep distracting you." The days passed in a blur of new experiences. Mornings were spent wandering cobblestone streets, Daisy giggling as she tried pastries bigger than her hands. Afternoons were filled with museums and boat rides along the river, Alessia effortlessly slipping between business calls and stolen moments with them. One evening, after a quiet dinner at the townhouse, Wesley found himself standing on the balcony, watching the city hum below. Alessia joined him, leaning against the railing. "You've been quiet today," she observed. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Just thinking." She nudged him gently. "Dangerous habit." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I never expected any of this." She turned to face him fully. "And now that you're here." He met her gaze. "I don't know how I'd go back to before." Her expression softened. "Maybe you don't have to." Wesley swallowed. "I need to be practical. I can't just live in a dream." Alessia reached for his hand. "Who says this is a dream? Maybe it's just a different version of reality." He searched her face, seeing the quiet determination there. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had been looking at life the wrong way. Because when she held his hand like this, when Daisy's laughter filled the air, when the city lights stretched endlessly before him, he wasn't sure he wanted to go back to the life he had known. And maybe he wouldn't have to. The streets of Paris glowed under the soft shimmer of streetlights as Wesley walked beside Alessia, their steps slow, unhurried. The air carried the scent of fresh pastries and rain-kissed stone, a stark contrast to the grit and exhaust of the city he had always known. Daisy was tucked into bed back at the townhouse, exhausted from another day of adventure, and for the first time since they had arrived, he and Alessia were alone. He glanced at her, at the way the golden light caught in her hair, casting a delicate glow over her features. "You ever get tired of it?" She turned to him, brow slightly raised. "Of what?" "This," he gestured around them, "the luxury, the constant movement, the expectations." A slow breath left her lips. "Sometimes." Wesley studied her, waiting for her to continue. She rarely spoke about the weight of her world, always carrying it with a practiced grace. But tonight, there was something softer in her stance. "There's freedom in having everything," she admitted, "but there's also a loneliness to it. People see what they want to see: status, power, the life they think I lead, but very few ever look past that." His fingers brushed against hers as they walked. "And what do you want them to see?" She exhaled, tilting her head slightly as if considering the question for the first time. "Someone real." Wesley slowed, turning to face her fully. "See you." Her lips parted slightly, as if the words had caught her off guard. He hadn't meant them as anything grand, just an honest truth. But the way her eyes softened, the way she seemed to breathe him in, it was as if no one had ever said those words to her before. The space between them dissolved as he reached for her, his hands settling on her waist. She leaned into him, her touch light against his chest, as if grounding herself in the moment. His voice was quieter now. "And what do you see when you look at me?" She didn't hesitate. Someone who doesn't realize how incredible he is. A quiet laugh left him, but she caught his chin, tilting his face toward hers. I mean it, Wesley. You're strong not just in the way you carry yourself, but in the way you love Daisy, the way you fight for what matters. That's rare. His pulse pounded in his ears. He had never been one for grand declarations, had never been the kind of man to expect more than what life had given him. But Alessia had a way of making him feel like he deserved more. Her voice was softer now. I don't want this to end when we leave Paris. His grip on her tightened slightly. It doesn't have to. A slow smile curved her lips as she pulled him closer, her breath warm against his skin. Then tell me what you want. For the first time in years, he didn't hesitate. You, us, a future that doesn't feel impossible. She exhaled a quiet laugh, full of relief and something deeper. Then maybe it's time to stop thinking about why it won't work and start figuring out how it will. His lips found hers in a kiss that was slow, deep, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. She melted into him, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt as if anchoring herself to this moment, to him. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. Come back with me, to New York, stay. His chest tightened. The idea of uprooting everything, of leaving behind the only life he had ever known, terrified him. But Alessia had never asked him to change who he was. She had only ever asked him to believe that something more was possible. He let out a slow breath, then nodded. All right, let's do this. Her face broke into a radiant smile before she kissed him again. Laughter caught between them. Back in New York, life took on a rhythm that was both strange and exhilarating. Wesley found work easily enough, his skills in demand, but it was the newness of it all that took the most adjusting. Daisy thrived, her world expanding in ways he had never imagined. She had space to grow, to dream, to be a kid without the weight of worry. And Alessia, she was his constant, slipping into his life as if she had always been there. One evening, after tucking Daisy into bed, Wesley found Alessia on the balcony of their new apartment, overlooking the glittering skyline. She turned when he stepped outside, her expression unreadable. I have something for you, she said. He arched a brow. Should I be worried? A quiet laugh escaped her before she pulled a small box from her pocket. His breath caught. Alessia. She opened it, revealing a simple yet elegant band. I know you wouldn't have planned something grand, wouldn't have wanted the spectacle. So I'm doing this my way. His heart pounded. I love you, she continued, her voice steady. And I want to spend my life with you. No expectations, no pressure, just us building something real. For the first time in his life, Wesley Sutton was speechless. Then slowly, he reached for the ring, his fingers brushing hers. You really think I'd say no? A grin broke across her face as he pulled her into his arms. You saying yes? He kissed her, his answer written in the way he held her, in the way he whispered against her lips, always. Months later, in a quiet ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered most, Wesley Sutton married the woman who had turned his world upside down. And as he danced with her under the golden glow of fairy lights, Daisy twirling beside them, he realized that home had never been a place. It had always been them.